It started with a letter. Plain, ordinary, the kind you barely glance at before tossing onto the kitchen counter. But as my eyes scanned the words, my stomach twisted into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. A debt. A massive one. In my name. I read it again, my hands trembling, willing it to be some sort of mistake. I had never borrowed this money. I had never even applied for a loan. And yet, the numbers stared back at me, cold and unforgiving, like a sentence I hadn't been around to hear. At first, I clung to denial. Identity theft, a banking error, there had to be an explanation. I spent hours on the phone, bouncing between hold music and scripted apologies, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't responsible for this. But when the details started falling into place, my stomach dropped. The loans weren't the result of some faceless scammer or clerical mistake. They had been taken out by my own parents, and they had used my name. The confrontation was nothing like I expected. I had braced myself for guilt, for regret, maybe even an apology. Instead, my father just sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "We raised you," he said flatly. "We sacrificed for you. This is just your turn to step up." My mother, ever the mediator, tried to soften the blow. "It's for the family, Julia. We knew you'd understand." Understand? How was I supposed to understand being betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect me? My voice caught in my throat, not from sadness, but from rage. I left that conversation feeling hollow. The weight of their words, their expectations, pressed down on me like chains I never agreed to wear. I had spent years building my life, my independence, my sense of control. And in a single moment, it had all been signed away. By them. But betrayal has a strange way of sharpening you. The cracks in my foundation weren't breaking me. They were making me see things differently. And for the first time, I felt something new, the urge to fight back. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind a tangled mess of disbelief and anger. How could they do this to me? How could they smile at me every day, knowing they had taken something so massive without even asking? My entire life, I had worked to be responsible, to be smart with money, to never rely on anyone for more than I could repay. And now, because of them, I was drowning in debt I never asked for. I thought about the sacrifices they claimed to have made. The clothes, the food, the roof over my head. Was this their justification? That raising me gave them the right to steal from me? I tried to recall moments when they struggled, times when they might have been desperate enough to justify this. But all I could remember were the little luxuries, the vacations, the expensive gadgets, the reckless spending they always shrugged off. And now, I was supposed to clean up the mess they had made. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. Another email, another warning. The urgency in the words was suffocating. Delinquent, overdue, final notice. As if I was some reckless debtor who had ignored my obligations. As if I had done this to myself. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the phone. I could feel it. This slow shift inside me, something hardening, something breaking. The old version of me, the one who would have done anything for my parents, was slipping away. I sat up, breathing heavily, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed a plan. I couldn't just accept this. I wouldn't. They expected me to roll over, to take this burden without question. But they had underestimated me. If they thought I would be their safety net, they were wrong. If they thought I wouldn't fight back, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Morning came, but the haze of betrayal didn't lift. I went through the motions, brushing my teeth, making coffee, checking emails. Except now, every action felt laced with resentment. My parents had stolen from me, and yet I was the one expected to be rational, to be the bigger person. The thought made my stomach turn. Was I really supposed to just accept this? To quietly shoulder their mistakes while they carried on as if nothing had happened? I couldn't bring myself to call them. Not yet. I knew what would happen. The guilt trips, the excuses, the way they'd twist this into something I owed them. I could already hear my mother's voice, soft but insistent. "We had no choice, Julia. We knew you'd help." And my father, less patient, more blunt. "You're being selfish. Family takes care of each other. But where was that care when they forged my name? Where was that love when they turned me into their financial scapegoat? I stared at the pile of bills, the emails, the numbers that seemed to multiply by the hour. This wasn't just money, it was control. They had taken something from me far greater than a number on a bank statement. They had stolen my choices, my security, my trust, and if I let them get away with it, if I agreed to clean up their mess, they would own me forever. I wouldn't let that happen. For the first time since opening that letter, I felt something close to clarity. If they expected me to quietly accept my fate, they were about to be disappointed. I wasn't their pawn. I wasn't their safety net. And I wasn't going to be their victim. This wasn't just about getting out of debt. This was about getting my life back. The first calls came before noon, a number I didn't recognize, but I knew exactly who it was. I let it ring. Then another, and another. By the fourth, my voicemail pinged, flat, robotic, a voice reading off a script about my delinquent account and urgent action required. My hands clenched into fists. It had begun. The debt collectors were circling, and I was their prey. By evening, my bank app refused to open. Error. Account restricted. I refreshed the screen again, a cold sweat forming at the back of my neck. The money I had worked so hard to save, gone. Not stolen, not withdrawn, but frozen. Locked away until I could resolve the outstanding balances I never agreed to. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My entire financial life was unraveling, and I couldn't stop it. Panic crept in like a slow poison. Every transaction I had made, every carefully planned budget, none of it mattered anymore. I was drowning in numbers I never spent, fighting consequences I never chose. And my parents? Silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. As if they had simply handed me this mess and walked away. As if I was nothing more than collateral damage in their financial disaster. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to call them and demand they fix this. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They wouldn't. They couldn't. Because in their minds, this wasn't their problem anymore. It was mine. And if I didn't find a way out, I'd be trapped under this weight forever. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact. I wanted to hear her voice, to demand answers, to make her explain how she could do this to me. But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. She'd sigh, maybe even sound a little sad, but not guilty. You don't understand, Julia. We had no choice. The same tired excuse, wrapped in the same manipulative softness. And my father? He'd be worse. You're overreacting. It's just money. We're family. Family. The word felt tainted now, a weapon instead of a bond. If I called them, they wouldn't be sorry. They would make me feel like the bad guy, like I was the one betraying them by refusing to shoulder their mess. And for a second, I hated myself for even hesitating, for still wanting, after everything, to believe they cared. But love shouldn't come with a price tag. It shouldn't come with a debt collector attached. The next call wasn't from them. It was another collector, this time a real person. Their voice was smooth, professional, but firm. They rattled off numbers I couldn't process, payment plans I had no intention of agreeing to. And then, the question that sent ice down my spine. Are you willing to take responsibility for this balance today? I swallowed, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. This was it, the moment they were waiting for, the moment I gave in. I ended the call without a word. My heart pounded against my ribs, my pulse thundering in my ears. No, I wasn't willing. I wasn't ready. I wasn't going to let them win. My parents had handed me this disaster expecting me to cave, to accept the weight they had dumped on my shoulders. But they had made a mistake. They thought they had broken me. They thought I had no choice. They were wrong. The pressure was suffocating. Every hour, a new call, a new email, a new reminder that my life was no longer my own. My credit score was plummeting, my bank accounts were frozen, and my name, was tied to a debt so enormous it felt like a life sentence. I kept waiting for the anger to dull, for the panic to settle into something manageable, but it only sharpened. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just debt. It was control. And my parents knew it. They weren't reaching out because they didn't have to. In their minds, this was already over. I was the responsible one, the one who always handled things, the one who never let anything fall apart. I was supposed to accept my fate, to take their mistakes as my own, to pay for their choices because that's what they had decided my role was. They didn't need to explain. They didn't need to apologize. In their world, this was already settled, but they didn't know me as well as they thought. I sat at my desk, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. If they had expected me to break, they were about to be disappointed. I wasn't their pawn. I wasn't their safety net. And I wasn't about to let them erase me under a mountain of debt I never chose. There had to be a way out. Loopholes, legal technicalities, something they hadn't considered. I didn't know what my next move was yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them win. I had spent my whole life believing that family meant trust, sacrifice, unconditional love. But love was not supposed to feel like this, like suffocation, like a noose tightening around my neck. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. They had stolen from me, lied to me, trapped me, and now they expected me to fix it, to be their victim. But that wasn't going to happen. If they thought I was just going to roll over, they were about to learn exactly what I was capable of. I stopped reacting, stopped answering calls, stopped panicking. If I was going to get out of this, I needed to think, not just survive each new wave of pressure, but fight. My parents had counted on my desperation, on my instinct to fix things, to make it all go away. But they had underestimated me. They saw me as their safety net. They forgot I could be a weapon. I started with the paperwork. Every email, every loan statement, every contract they had signed in my name. I printed everything, highlighting inconsistencies, circling signatures that weren't mine. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew one thing. Fraud leaves a trail. And if they thought I wouldn't dig, they were wrong. The next step was securing myself. I opened a new bank account under a different institution, one they had never touched, moved what little funds I had left. I locked down my credit, placed fraud alerts, changed every password I had. I wasn't just fighting back, I was erasing every point of access they thought they had to me. If they wanted to use me, they would find nothing left to take. And then, I started looking at my options. Lawyers, financial loopholes, legal gray areas that could shift the blame where it belonged. I wasn't just trying to escape this debt, I was going to make sure it stayed with them. They had played a game, betting I'd fold. But I had news for them. I was done playing fair. The more I dug, the more cracks I found. The loan documents were sloppier than I expected, signatures that barely resembled mine, inconsistencies in birth dates, even an address I had never lived at. I stared at the papers, a slow, cold satisfaction settling in my chest. This wasn't just deception, this was sloppiness. And sloppiness could be used against them. I made calls, careful ones. A lawyer friend from college, a financial advisor I barely knew but had once helped with a project, even an old coworker who had dealt with identity fraud. Every conversation revealed another possible way out. If I could prove the signatures were forged, I could contest the debt. If I could prove my parents had committed fraud, the liability could shift back to them. The law wasn't on their side. It was on mine. But I couldn't move too fast. If they sensed what I was doing, they might try to cover their tracks, manipulate me into backing down. So I played my role. I sent polite, confused emails to the lenders, asking for clarification. I let a few debt collector calls go through, acting unsure, overwhelmed. I wanted them to think I was still on the edge, still drowning. That way, when I finally moved, they wouldn't see it coming. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to control. This wasn't just about getting out of debt anymore. This was about justice, about making sure they paid the price for what they had done, and the best part, they had no idea what was coming. I kept my mask on. When my mother finally called, her voice was light, almost casual, as if she were checking in on my well-being. "How are you holding up?" she asked, like I was going through a rough patch and not fighting to undo the damage she and my father had caused. I played along, let my voice waver just enough. "I don't know what to do, Mom. It's just so overwhelming." The guilt in her tone was non-existent. Instead, there was relief. She thought I was breaking. Good, let her think that. In reality, I was already 3 steps ahead. I had secured an appointment with a lawyer, forwarded the fraudulent documents, and started drafting my case. The evidence was stacking up in my favor, enough to prove that the loans had been taken out without my consent. My parents had gambled on me staying quiet, on my loyalty outweighing my self-preservation. They had bet everything on the idea that I would never turn on them. But they had underestimated just how much they had changed me. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the folders, the bank statements, the legal notes I had scrawled down. This was it. The next move was mine. The moment I filed the complaint, the moment I pushed forward, my parents would no longer be my family in the way they once were. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about betrayal, and I had made my decision. They weren't going to win. The complaint was filed. The moment I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. There was no going back now. My parents would be notified soon, and when they realized what I had done, the illusion they had built, the one where I would always bend, always absorb their mistakes, would shatter. A part of me braced for impact, but another part was ready for the fight. The first call came from my father. I let it ring. Then my mother, then my father again. A text followed, short and clipped. "What did you do?" My pulse should have spiked, but instead I felt nothing. They knew. They understood now that I wasn't playing their game anymore. For once, they were the ones panicking, scrambling to fix the mess they had created. And I was finally free of their expectations. Then came the anger. My father's voicemail was sharp, laced with a frustration he barely tried to contain. "I can't believe you'd do this to your own family," as if I was the one who had betrayed them. My mother's message was different, quieter, more insidious. "You don't have to take it this far, sweetheart. We can fix this together." Together. As if they hadn't abandoned me the second they signed my name onto those loans. I deleted the messages without responding. There was nothing left to say. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it, just like they had expected me to. I expected more calls, more messages, maybe even a desperate visit. But instead, there was silence. A suffocating, heavy silence that felt more like calculation than surrender. They weren't backing down. They were regrouping. And I knew exactly what came next. The manipulation. The rewritten version of events where they were the victims, and I was the ungrateful, selfish daughter who had turned her back on her family. It didn't take long for proof of that to surface. A text from my aunt, laced with faux concern. "Julia, your parents are really struggling. They're heartbroken over all of this. Maybe there's a way to work things out?" Then another from my cousin, less gentle. "I don't know what's going on between you and your parents, but this isn't how you treat family." I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around my phone. It had begun. They couldn't argue with legal documents. They couldn't erase their signatures. So instead, they were trying to erase me. Not physically, not entirely, but in the way that mattered, in the way that made me question myself. Had I gone too far? Should I have tried harder to resolve things quietly? The old version of me, the one desperate for peace, for validation, might have given in. But that girl didn't exist anymore. I ignored the messages, set my phone aside, and focused on what mattered, protecting myself. I had already taken steps to separate my finances from them, but now I needed to sever something even deeper. The guilt, the conditioning, the invisible strings that had kept me tethered to them for so long. If they thought shame would pull me back, they were about to be disappointed. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't theirs to control. The final blow came through an email. Not from my parents, but from their lawyer. A formal, sterile message outlining their position, as if this were just a business dispute, as if they hadn't shattered something irreparable between us. They weren't admitting fault. Of course not. Instead, they were claiming misunderstanding, shifting blame, painting themselves as victims of a system that had left them with no choice. I almost laughed. No choice? They had a choice every step of the way. They had a choice when they signed my name, when they took the money, when they ignored every call from the banks. And now, when faced with the consequences of their own decisions, they wanted to rewrite reality, make it seem like I was the one punishing them. As if I owed them forgiveness. But I didn't owe them anything. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. Let them fight this in court if they wanted. Let them twist themselves into knots trying to justify the unjustifiable. I wasn't playing along. I had already made my decision the moment I filed the fraud report, the moment I stopped answering their calls, the moment I put myself first. And yet, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, something heavy still pressed against my chest. Not regret, not guilt, just the quiet, sinking truth that no matter how much I fought back, no matter how much I freed myself from their financial mess, I would never fully escape them. They had stolen more than my money. They had stolen my trust, my sense of safety. That would take longer to rebuild, but I would rebuild it, on my terms, without them. The strangest part was the quiet. After months of stress, anger, and confrontation, I had expected some grand, dramatic resolution, one final explosive moment where everything was laid bare. But there was no closure, no cinematic ending, just silence. My parents had stopped trying to reach me. No more texts, no more calls, no more guilt-laced messages from relatives. It was as if I had never existed. And yet, their absence felt like both a victory and a wound. I had won. I had freed myself from their financial trap, ensured they were the ones left dealing with the consequences of their actions. But I had lost something too. The illusion of family. The comforting lie I had told myself for years. That no matter what, they would always protect me. That had been shattered beyond repair. I caught myself hesitating before filling out forms, before signing anything official. The paranoia lingered, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I triple-checked my bank accounts, changed my passwords again, scanned every document I was handed. What they had done had rewired me, made me suspicious, careful in a way I never had to be before. The damage wasn't just financial, it was woven into me now, into the way I moved through the world. But it wasn't all bad. The fear had changed into something else, something sharper, something stronger. I wasn't the same person who had opened that letter months ago, shaking and desperate for answers. I wasn't naive anymore. I wasn't someone who could be used. I had lost something, yes, but I had gained something too. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to stand on my own. Freedom didn't come all at once. It wasn't a single moment of relief, but a slow unraveling, like peeling away layers of something rotten, something that had been wrapped around me for too long. Some days, I felt lighter than I ever had before, untethered from their expectations, their manipulation, their endless demands. Other days, the weight of it all settled in unexpected places. A pause before answering a phone call, a flicker of hesitation when filling out paperwork. The damage they had done wasn't something I could just shake off, but I was healing, in ways I never thought I would. I found myself relearning things I should have already known, how to trust my own instincts, how to make decisions without bracing for backlash, how to exist without constantly explaining or justifying myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't making choices based on how they would react. I wasn't waiting for permission, for approval, for validation. I was just living. Their absence became a kind of quiet space in my life, one I didn't rush to fill. There were no forced holiday visits, no strained phone calls where I tried to keep the peace, no more waiting for the next inevitable crisis, the next demand, the next carefully placed guilt trip. And maybe that was the biggest shift of all, realizing that I wasn't missing anything, that I wasn't grieving them, that I had walked away and instead of feeling lost, I felt found. For the first time in a long time, I belonged to myself. Some scars never fully fade. I knew that. Even as I moved forward, even as I reclaimed my life, there were pieces of me that would always bear the imprint of what they had done. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Not with banks, not with legal documents, and certainly not with people. I questioned everything, dissected every promise, every offer of help. I had learned the hard way that love could be a weapon, that family could be just another kind of trap. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't consumed by anger or regret. If anything, I felt sharper, more deliberate, more aware. I knew who I was now. I knew what I was capable of. And most importantly, I knew that I didn't owe anyone anything, especially not the people who had tried to steal my future out from under me. They had built their lives on lies, and for years I had been a part of that foundation. But I wasn't anymore. I still got updates about them, little whispers through relatives who hadn't yet learned to mind their own business. The house was gone. The cars, too. My father had tried to fight the legal battle, but the evidence had been too strong. My mother, ever the peacemaker, had tried to reach out again, not with an apology, of course, but with a soft, careful, "Can't we just move past this?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say, because I had moved past it. Not in the way she wanted, not in a way that erased what they had done. I had moved past them, past the weight of their expectations, past the role they had tried to force me into. They had taken everything from me that they possibly could, but in the end, I had gained something they would never have: freedom. And I wasn't looking back.